We're live, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio. That's not Preservative Talk Radio. This is Preservative Talk Video. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the Freedom of Information Act and you. Freedom of Information Act and you. I've got a little PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and dial that up real quick, and it's going to keep me on track, keep me paying attention to the format here. So I've done this a few times, and on one you couldn't hear the sound, next one you couldn't see my PowerPoint presentation, so I'm having to do it again. But we're going to talk about the Freedom of Information Act, and it's in an effort that I'm making to unload all of the information that I've acquired over the last 25 years. And sometimes I've had litigation, and I've had to sue the United States. And so far, it's for the most part been actually successful. So I'm going to take some of that information and I'm going to pass it on to people so they don't have to ask me individually. So I can spend an hour giving a lecture on Freedom of Information Act for free, and then it can go to a whole bunch of people, and they can take it and run with it. So Freedom of Information Act and you. Who cares? So here's the Freedom of Information Act, and it actually tells you why you care here on the government website. Thank you for visiting the government's central website for FOIA, etc. And look what it says here. The basic function of the Freedom of Information Act is to ensure informed citizens vital to the is to ensure informed citizens vital to the functioning of a democratic society. Okay, so that's what they're doing. They're making sure it's a democratic society. I think it's actually a society of law and not men. It's not a society or a government of the people. It's a government of law and not men, and it is the people that have a duty to make sure it gets carried out in the right way. So that's my take on it. So outline of discussion. When is it necessary? We're going to give you some examples. We're going to have some benefits. And where it won't work, there are actually exemptions where the government doesn't have to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about the current Freedom of Information Act request that has been sent regarding somebody who needs a passport but doesn't have a birth certificate. And also we're going to talk about what you do. What's your pre-FOIA research? What's that going to look like? And then we'll talk about some of the future series. Some other things I'd like to talk about in this format. And hopefully we'll have a little bit improved equipment and a few more bells and whistles on this as it progresses. Some guests, some co-hosts, and things like that. We'll see how that all plays out. But so in the meantime, I had an example. A military retiree needed veterans benefits, and he couldn't fill out the forms the way they required, and he needed a religious accommodation. So I did a FOIA for him and passed the information on to him. There's a friend of mine was stopped at a checkpoint, let's admit it's kind of Gestapo-like. Show me your papers. And because of his concern about what is the right way to do things, what the wrong way to do things, he did not participate in the interrogation, and they hossed him out of his car, broke his windows, took him to jail, charged him with obstruction of justice, all these kind of things. And it turns out when we read the information we got from the Freedom of Information Act request from the state police, turns out they were violating their own procedures. It's true. Their procedures are actually constitutional, and the conduct of their policemen were not. And that's pretty much across the land. These checkpoints aren't actually fulfilling the Constitution, but nobody successfully won a case. Well, some people have won some cases on it under certain circumstances, but the practice itself is actually abhorrent to the Constitution. So, and again, you only really can connect those dots when you have an opportunity to get the government to produce the records that they use to guide their own conduct. The one we're going to talk about today is a passport agency denying an application for a passport based on there was requirements that they're making that aren't in law. In fact, are obstructing what should be the intention of the State Department in making sure that somebody has a passport in hand. So, what are the benefits of a Freedom of Information Act request? It ends the goose chase, and I say that in that you're going to see in this denial letter from the State Department that they send the applicant on a goose chase. You know, when the moon is blue, we'll give you a passport. When you go through these other hoops that don't exist, we'll give you a passport. So Freedom of Information Act will hopefully end the goose chase. The other thing, it fulfills the biblical mandate. What do you mean? 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 talks about upholding the government institution. The word in Greek is theses, and it really, for a constitutional republic, it's a perfect word, that the minister of God for our good is this system of checks and balances and rules and due process and all these things. So when we exercise a Freedom of Information Act request, we're going and fulfilling the process that is instituted by God for our good. So that's one of the things for it. The other thing is exhaust administrative remedies, which is biblical. You basically have an opportunity to go to the agency and use the agency's process to fix their own problem, to fix your problem with them. And the Freedom of Information Act can enable you and equip you to make sure that that process is done well and likely in your favor, because it gives you an opportunity to show the agency what their exact rules are supposed to be. It's educational, absolutely. There's just so much you learn, especially when they produce information. It's a wonderful revelation in many instances. The other thing is discovery without court obstruction. We're going to see this in the exemptions of FOIA. And you're going to discover that if you get into litigation and have not already had the record produced into your hand, you're going to be obstructed by the judiciary. You can do all the rules, read the rules, apply the scheduling conferences, motions, and everything like that. But it could be that the court itself is bent toward protecting the government, not the institution. Sneeze. Not on you. But so discovery, if once you get in the court situation and adjudicate or litigation, you may not have access to that information that otherwise would have been yours with a pre-litigation Freedom of Information Act request. Settles matters without long litigation, solve the problem. That's biblical too. Make things straight with your opponent as soon as you can. And this, again, will enable you to equip you to do that successfully. And then ultimately, if it has to go to litigation, your ducks are in a row that when you file your complaint, your statement of facts, and you submit, especially if you're addressing the government, you submit as exhibits with your complaint items that came right out of the record that basically connect the dots that the court should come to the same conclusion that you did. There's a great benefit there. Now, so the example we're going to use in this whole series I'm doing of preservative talk is I'm going to be, there's real world situations. We're not just talking theory about these protections of our individual liberties and rights and against the wrongs. We're living it out. We're fleshing it out. We're addressing these things ourselves, and hopefully others are going to get the benefit of it and not have to go through the same painstaking, grueling torture that we've had to go through to learn these things. So here's our one example. Here's our anecdote, is a passport denial letter. Let me get to this thing here. So here's our passport denial letter. And one thing I just noticed when preparing for this FOIA talk, this letter tells you where it's from, Sterling, Virginia. But it doesn't tell you the particular code of the office in this building in Sterling, Virginia. If you get to the bottom here, you're going to see the signature by Customer Service Department. There is no real life person named Customer Service Department. Of course, our FOIA is intending to fix that problem. So in this example, there's a denial of a passport because the person didn't have a birth certificate to provide with their application. So you see it says, it was denied for the following reason: a statement from the appropriate state registrar of records certifying that there's no birth record on file. So what, sadly, now this seems, that seems reasonable. It's because you didn't see what was filed with the application. What was filed with the application was affidavits from 4 people that were in the birth room, affidavits explaining why no birth record was requested, affidavits saying that the child's name was not given to the hospital, so no birth certificate could have been produced, and an affidavit saying that the person went to the registrar, filled out the application the way they should have to get a search done, but the registrar refused to do the search unless the person filled in everything that was necessary to apply for a birth certificate, which is not what the person wanted to do. So whoever's doing this has ignored all the documents that have been put to them. And if you just read this letter by itself, you'd think they were on their game. But that's why we need a Freedom of Information Act request. Produce all the documents so we can use this to explain to your seniors why a birth certificate needs to be issued pronto. So now one of the things they did, remember I said avoiding the goose chase? Here, look what they did. For more information, you may visit the Center for Disease Control at, it's a goose chase. A goose chase down the Center for Disease Control is not going to produce anything that's going to be helpful. And then it says, if no formal birth record exists, now, so look at this, it's just informed me as I'm reading this. It's like, okay, Center for Disease Control, are they going to have the birth record? What are they doing with a stack of birth certificates? Don't know. So if no formal birth record exists, you will receive a letter from the state registrar that will certify a search was made, no record was found. I guess we could go to Center for Disease Control and get them to ask for a birth record. Maybe that's how Center for Disease Control gets all their birth certificates, is by having the State Department force you to go through them to ask for one, because maybe the state wouldn't produce it unless it was asked for. I don't know what the trivia is here, but here it is. They're telling us what we will receive from a state registrar. A liar, liar, pants on fire. You don't have a clue, State Department, what any state does with regard to their state registrars. Now, some states may produce something. Some of them may fulfill their own requirements, but some may not. And so it's a goose chase. Here's a goose chase. Go do the impossible, and then when you get the impossible done, come back and see me. Then it tells you other things that you should have. And now they're asking for things that in the affidavit explained why they either were or were not there. Birth certificate, explained. Baptismal certificate, they didn't like it because it didn't have the parent's name on it. These are Baptists. These are believers' baptism. These are Anabaptists. If you go back far enough, these are the people that your Christianity isn't associated with your birth, with your name of your family. It's confession of faith as autonomous person, man, woman, individual, whatever you want to call it. So early school records, a person homeschooled, didn't have school records until late in their schooling when they began to do this national testing that is not under a state program. And then U.S. Census records. So today I called the Census Bureau, and we're going to look into getting one of these things. But nonetheless, even without the census thing, there's no requirement to have fulfilled a census or to have a census record to be identified or eligible and entitled to a United States passport. There's enough information that they have to fulfill it. And there's a delay right now that it's unnecessary based on the information that they already have. So we're asking for, show us the record. So here's and then it goes on. Oh, by the way, it said that the adjudicator or the acceptance agent didn't sign the document. When they fulfill the FOIA, we'll see if indeed the passport agent didn't sign the document. And you think, oh, they wouldn't make that up. you haven't been in litigation with the United States against the United States Department of State and the U.S. Justice Department for the last 3 years. I have. That is a video in it of itself, the adventure there, and the amount of declarations under oath that they're filing to the court, that when you go to the reference they declared, you actually read the reference and you find the reference itself contradicts absolute opposite. It's the absolute opposite of the declaration under oath by the government officials. You wouldn't believe it unless you saw it. So, just to be sure, we're going to be asking for the document. The other thing is we go on down here. Notice that it is signed by who? Who is it? Who is it signing this? Customer Service Department. Wow. I mean, so departments are last name. Wonder if they were named after a distant uncle named Customer. We don't know, but the FOIA is going to solve that problem. So we're going to go back to our outline here and see what's next after the denial letter. That was the denial letter. Now let's see what, and I'm going to say we. We're going to use the word we for a while. And then I'm also going to use the word me, and you'll see where it applies. So there's a Carmichael family member. We redacted this to keep the person's information, confidential. So it's a family member of mine, and it was this letter was written on November 21st, 12 days after the denial letter was drafted. It was only, obviously half the time it took to actually travel from the government to our house. And what we say here is in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act, the Privacy Act, please provide records regarding the processing and adjudication of my passport application referenced above. And the reference number is on the letter. And then ask for it in electronic format because you can have it in paper copy, but now you're talking about time and expense that you're going to have to pay for. So here we ask for electronic format. That's what the government in Virginia sent to me on a FOIA over the police requirements, and they sent PDF files on a disk. It's great. I think they charged me $5.42 or something crazy like that, and I paid the bill later. And it worked out beautifully. So please provide an electronic format, either downloadable by internet hyperlink or by electronic media, and a hard copy wherever necessary. So the goal is to limit the cost of money and time to the agency and the requester, and for the convenience of the information transfer. Internet hyperlinks or data files less than 5 megabytes can be sent electronically by email to, and of course we had provided an email. Then, what are we looking for? So with a Freedom of Information Act request, you can only ask for information that exists, a record. Show me your records. So all documents relating to the process of I'm going to speak as the person, my application and the reference number. So that's all documents. Don't have to be specific. That means I would include the application, wouldn't it? So if the application doesn't show up, they haven't fulfilled the FOIA. All documents of interagency and intra-agency communication regarding it. And also, it says, and other people related to me, such as my husband, father, mother, siblings, etc. Because there are other people in the family that have passports, and some of them are in litigation with the United States and are known by name by some of the people that this letter is going to go to. A Foreign Affairs Manual instruction. So we're going to show you in the segment of this discussion where we talk about doing research before you fill out a FOIA. And you'll see the Foreign Affairs Manual, we could not find anything that would justify the denial on the basis that the agency said. So we're asking them, show us the Foreign Affairs Manual instructions. And you also see in the Foreign Affairs Manual online research that some instructions are available online by hyperlink and some are unavailable. So those things that are unavailable, not accessible, we don't know if they have the information that would justify the denial of the passport. So we want to see the papers. Document showing the time. Oh, watch this. This gets rid of the customer service department name. A document showing the name, title, office, phone number of the natural person whose pseudonym is customer service department. We found we're in the middle of this issue of in the United States court of having to amend the complaint because the people that misbehaved aren't named. And the government says, well, you didn't claim anybody not acting in their official capacity that you can sue, so your case is moot. No, we did. We called them co-conspirators. The word conspirator is an indicator that they are not acting under the color of under their official capacity, but under the color of law, because conspiracy is a violation of law. It's fraud. It's a whole bunch of stuff. So, if we can get the name of whoever's doing it, then we have a name of a party that we can put in there. And the things that are sovereign immunity that the United States has is not, depending on the situation, is not carried over to the party who's actually violating the law. So here's another thing, a document showing the authority as a United States law. So here's the whole crux of this thing is, if there's no authority in law for you to demand what you're demanding, then stop demanding it and issue the passport. So, and so far we haven't found anything. So show us the authority that the United States Department of State can demand a state government to provide any certification whatsoever. None. So that's in there. So, and where this applies to you is that you're seeing one example of a Freedom of Information Act request. Everything that's submitted for a Freedom of Information Act request has got to be specific to your situation. And be, I say, keeping it down to a very specific thing is probably helpful to a point. But it depends on them maybe excluding information that if you're just too specific, they say, well, we're going to withhold this because we can see it be related to it, but maybe it's damning, So it's not something that they'd want to, let's say, put in your hands, and they can get away with it because you weren't broad enough. So it's an interesting balance. Pray about it. The foregoing request is priority. Okay, we explained that this first request is priority. Give us this information, and according to the Privacy Act, Freedom of Information Act, they have 20 days to respond. Now, secondarily, we've asked for other information, and we'll tell you why, and then we'll tell you what it is. In our case, we're suing the United States over the passport, Carmichael versus Pompeo. Did I say this before? 468 F Supplement 3rd edition, page 360, is one of the rulings we've had. We've noticed that this passport form has changed since our case. And what they've done is taken the thing that we showed that how they violated the law, sending us this bogus information form that had no authority in law. It violated the Paperwork Reduction Act in that it didn't have a valid OMB number, so it hadn't been reviewed and prepared and scrutinized by the Office of Management and Budget. And so this form was not required to be answered, but that's what they based their denial of our passports on. And in the Paperwork Reduction Act, it says that if it is not a valid form requesting information, there can be no penalty for not filling it in, for not replying to it. So what they did is they took that please fill in the bogus form, and they put that statement of a requirement on the passport application form, because the passport application form has a valid OMB number. Now, whether I want to spend the time to find out the tracking of the paperwork that was involved in getting that bogus affidavit to be applied to the passport form, that's what we're looking at here. Are they going in the background right now when we point out to them that there's no authority in law for them to be denying the passport based on the basis of what they're claiming? Then what if while this delay is going on, they know they're giving somebody 90 days to respond, that they're out creating this quasi-authority, like getting it showing up on paper somehow, just like they did on the passport form, which everybody is now blessed with. So this is what we asked for. Please provide necessary to expedite the processing of the first five items. So don't delay those other ones, but provide documents created since the submission of my passport application for the purpose of changing the Foreign Affairs Manual, internal procedures, Office of Management and Budget authorizations, regulations, Federal Register publications, or other thing related to the processing or adjudication of passport application where there is no birth certificate. So it's a secondary thing, but it's a valid FOIA request. Produce these things that you're doing to make up for the vacuum that there is in your procedures. And then we just reiterated that the format and gave a $200 limit without notice. You can produce something if it's going to be up to $200. We'll guarantee the payment. It probably won't. It's probably going to be $25 or less, and they presume that you're going to pay $25 or less without you having to mention any dollar amount. Also we said if there's a higher significant cost, please provide the estimate, and then we'll get back with you. So look forward to response within 20 days in accordance with the Privacy Act, etc. Now, the family member is the person who executes it. This is administrative. You do not need a lawyer to type your letter or to sign your letter. And what I did is I'm the typist. You'll see I've actually documented that on the letter. I used full block business format. So you see these paragraphs are fully justified. I would not recommend that if you're writing a book to fully justify this. They used to do that, but it turns out it's harder for the mind to track the words. It's more difficult to read, turns out, in a full block format. But this is what the government uses, so I created the letter in the same format. The initials here are not the initials of the person who signed it. I should have put CFM as an example here. Should be all capitals, title case of the person who's executing the document. Here is lowercase, my initials, where I'm the one who typed it. Now, I think they're going to know that because of the history of our case and things that have gone on, they're going to suspect that I was the typist anyway. But let's give it to them a very professional way. If they didn't know me, they might assume that there's professional assistance behind this. So, I think, you don't want to fake your way into making it look like a lawyer wrote it or something like that. But to give them the best product that you can, my experience in life is the more professionalism that you exhibit, the more likely that you're going to influence people. You want to be a social influencer? Influence whoever it is that you're writing. That's something to think about. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, please put it on below. Subscribe, link, share this with your friends. I'm going to kind of wrap it up here because that's really about the bottom of it. And we'll talk about, so let me give it a plug. I'm David Alan Carmichael, this is Preservative Talk. And I'm going to be bringing things that are relevant to you to give people equipping. So some of the things we're experiencing in our litigation, we're going to do a video on it, discussion. The hope is that to continue on is we're going to have hosts, guest hosts, and interviews and things like that, depending on the situation, and we're going to improve the product, the sound quality, the everything, the bells and whistles. So as you see there right now, something, I guess, on the screen, I didn't realize it, is blocking my face. See, little things like that. So I don't want to redo this video because this is actually the third time. I spent 3 hours doing this video, and because I wasn't looking down to see the fact that that something's blocking my face. So let me go back to this PowerPoint thing, and essentially. Okay, so FOIA exemption. So bottom line is intend to improve it, but I think already you're going to see that this is useful. So let's go to the FOIA exemptions. So the government is required to produce whatever you tell them to produce. It's a requirement, but there may be an exemption. So There's 9 exemptions. You can go to the FOIA website and you're going to see these exemptions. So if a president gives an executive order that classifies a certain criteria of things that would be not available under the Freedom of Information Act, he can do it. It's supposed to be for national defense. So he's protecting your life, your liberty, and your property by this national defense thing. So it's fulfilling that purpose of government to protect your life, liberty, and property while you're using this administrative procedure to protect your life, liberty, and property. It protects information about the personnel rules and practices of the agency. So the human resources manager doesn't need to cough up their procedures about what they're doing with regarding to their corrections of their personnel after they misbehave over your FOIA. It, incorporates into FOIA certain non-disclosure provisions that are contained in other federal laws. I don't know what those are. So I didn't go into enough research to see what those exemptions are because, again, the exemptions are not the focus of this conversation. Trade secrets, financial information, things like that is privileged. 5 is important. 5 goes to what I was talking to you about earlier, about when it gets into the judiciary. So once you file for litigation, you're not operating under the Freedom of Information Act anymore. Let's see what this says. Protect certain records exchanged within or between agencies that are normally privileged in the civil discovery context, such as records protected by the deliberative process privilege. Now, let's put this in simple terms. When you go to court and you sue, to make sure you verify evidence that a jury is going to see, you have a process called discovery. You get documents. You get them to answer questions. They call them interrogatories. You get to depose people. You get to interview them under oath. And you can discover information, or there's information you already know that you can get them to admit on the record under oath. That way, you can either get a bench trial, a judge can look at the evidence, transcripts, connect the dots, and rule in your favor, or you take it to trial for a jury, and you've already got things that they've said. Now, they say one thing in deposition, say it different in front of the jury. Now we got a perjury issue on whoever's making the declaration. The other thing is, all the questions you ask in a deposition, you're not going to ask in front of a jury. It's a time factor. So as you're going to consolidate, you're going to basically use the things that are most important to you. So, but you don't get that in the judiciary without the judge issuing an order. You're stuck waiting for the judge if the judge will issue an order. So in our case in the United States court right now, we're for 3 years been fighting over a demand for discovery that is being ignored for 3 years. So that's why FOIA is important. But so once it goes to judiciary, Rule 5 exemption kicks in. Okay, protects information about individuals' medical files. Okay, personal privacy stuff. Law enforcement. So now keep in mind, if you look at this, if it's law enforcement purposes or whatever, notice it says, but only to the extent that the production of such enforcement records or information, we're going to get specific, that it can only be blanked out. And they're not going to, they shouldn't tell you, no, you can't have that information in total. They should be able to give all the information that they can, except for that which they're not allowed to give. And that they should blank out. Let's see what that is. It can interfere with law enforcement proceedings, deprive somebody right to a fair trial. These are constitutionally protected things. Could constitute unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Obviously, they have to protect everybody's life, liberty, and property. And it's not subject to intervention by this or damage through your looking for a FOIA. It could be a confidential source. You don't want to give away spy information because they're busy protecting your life, liberty, and property, supposedly, from the bad guys out there. Techniques and procedures for law enforcement, investigations, and prosecutions, things like that. Again, this is it has to be, even if they try to claim something is privileged this way is under this exemption. They bear the burden of showing why that would be exempt from disclosure. So some of the stuff initially you'll see, might be blanked out, and then if it's relevant to what you're needing, the information you need, it's contestable in court under an action. The cause of action is a violation of the FOIA. It could reasonably be expected to endanger life or physical safety of an individual. Again, the compelling interest of the government, according to the Declaration of Independence, I think appropriately stated, is to protect life, liberty, and property. So they have a duty to do that, and you do too, because they're working on your behalf. Let's see what else. Supervision of financial institutions, so those guys are so protected. And then you can get some stuff off the Geological Survey, but I guess there's some proprietary information that is protected for whatever reasons. Miners don't want to necessarily have everybody on the planet knowing what it is they found. Yeah, we'll see. Life, liberty, and property protection. Research first. Okay, so before you go into it and file a FOIA, I'm going to use an example of what kind of research that I did for our litigation and for the FOIA request. So this is an example of this denial of the birth certificate thing. Examine the denial letter, read the references. It could be, again, that it's a goose chase. In our suit against the United States, we found when you check the references that they quoted as saying one thing, they conclude in their statements that it means something. You click that reference, you go check it out, you go read it, finds out that the reference actually contradicts what the government is selling to the court. Sad but true. Research the higher law. What is that? So you work your way backwards. Foreign Affairs Manual. So the person adjudicating your application in this instance is subject to the Foreign Affairs Manual. It's not the Foreign. In fact, that's what we're found in our federal case. Foreign Affairs Manual is telling one thing. The behavior of the adjudicator is the exact opposite. So we hold them accountable to the Foreign Affairs Manual. Then there's something squirrely about the Foreign Affairs Manual. Check to see if it's fulfilling the Code of Federal Regulations. If the Federal Code of Federal Regulations says something's a little squirrely, doesn't seem right, seems like a wrong instead of a right, see how it squares against the statute that controls it. So 22 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, relates to 22 USC, United States Code, statutes. Then, of course, you check it against the Constitution, and even if the Constitution, if somebody says, well, the Constitution tolerates it, guess what? Not really. The Ninth Amendment protects and reserves those rights that were not enumerated. You know where you find those rights? In the Bible. The Bible is about rights and wrongs. Law is about rights and wrongs. So if it's wrong, absolutely, you have a right to be protected by the Ninth Amendment. So check your authority structure. And what I did for Foreign Affairs Manual, it's kind of interesting. I go to Google, and you'll see I've searched this before. Yeah, Foreign Affairs Manual, I'll just type an F, right? And then the web page, the government web page is pretty handy. But it doesn't give you everything. It turns out you're going to go here, I'll give you an example. So you have all these things, these general areas of Foreign Affairs Manual that you can learn about, all their procedures and everything. And it goes on to 9 and others. But we're going to go to 8, which is passports. It has a table of contents. But see, some of these things are unavailable. So, and I went even to some of these unavailable folders and found available documents. That, let's see what this says. It says unavailable, unavailable. So there's a document that they're not allowing the public to see. So I've gone in there and I can't find anything that justifies their denial of the passport under the guise that they have. But so some of these things, you can go here and it talks about marriage, paternity, and all this kind of stuff. So it actually gets into the common law. Why do they do things based back on the common law that the country inherited, and some of those unenumerated rights that are protected by the Ninth Amendment. So it's very interesting reading, coming to here and see what it is specifically the specific application of the regulations when it's fleshing itself out in the day-to-day decisions. So they have hyperlinks here, and you can go to these hyperlinks, and some of the hyperlinks actually don't go anywhere. So that's why we've asked for documents that aren't available, possibly either don't exist, or they exist but we can't get them. We have not found them using this open to the public kind of resource. But so that's what you do is just go and search Foreign Affairs Manual, in this case, or whatever manual. You got to kind of do a search on what it is that the topic that you're dealing with. I don't know what kind of obstruction you might be having from a government agent at this time. So Code of Federal Regulations, I did the same thing. Now I do want to show you that there's a couple items here that I prefer. Now I know it's 22 Code of Federal Regulations is passport, 8 Code of Federal Regulations relate to some passport stuff. But you, if you've never done it, right, would go Code of Federal Regulations, and you can see where I typed before, passports. Just type in what makes sense and see what they come up with. Now here there's some government links, and I've been there before, and let's just say it's not as good production of a website, and sometimes the links don't work properly. So I've gone here to Cornell University has a web page that'll give you the Code of Federal Regulations and the various issues that you can look up and read the Code of Federal Regulations. So this is what's guiding the Foreign Affairs Manual. If the Foreign Affairs Manual is violating this, it's violating the law. So this is doing your research to find out. And the other thing is what we were winning in our case in the United States court right now is that we've gone to the Foreign Affairs Manual, found out that they were lying to the court, that the Foreign Affairs Manual has something, shows something different than their actual practice that has been injuring us. And then also, it turns out that the Code of Federal Regulations has already dealt with some of the issues that they say they're justified in injuring us. But if you go to the Code of Federal Regulations, it shows that they're in violation of it. So we worked our way backwards, and we're able actually, in our discussions in briefs, to be able to show what the Foreign Affairs Manual actually says, show that agrees with the Code of Federal Regulations, and you just work your way back. So, I mean, I'm even thinking right now, there's so many people have said, oh, the Patriot Act requires this and this and this and this, and all this kind of stuff. You read the Patriot Act, it turns out it doesn't. And there people are basing, let's say, obstructionist behaviors or oppressive behaviors or denying things to you under the guise of the Patriot Act. You actually go to the statute, and it doesn't say that. And then, in fact, I found that some federal regulations are a violation of the Patriot Act. They're ordering banks to do things that is not what the code, not what the statute said. So they're imposing on people's rights, injuring people, and it's supposedly based on the Patriot Act. Go to the Patriot Act, and they're wrong. So that's how you look at your situation, do some research to find out as much as you can with as much as your brain can tolerate, and kind of get your ducks in a row and understand maybe and print out each little one that relates to you. And then look at whatever denial letter as an example. And then what regulations you have. And don't argue in your federal or your FOIA. You just ask the information for them to produce records that are filling in the blank. And you don't have to tell them that it's a blank. You just describe to them what it is, what kind of record you're looking for. And that's FOIA. That's FOIA for you. And now we're going to go on to, let's see what we got here. Oh, I was going to go back to, let me just put this big orange thing right back in our faces, because it's prettier than whatever else they had there. So that's my Freedom of Information Act talk. I hope it was beneficial to you to see an example. Also, for those who are interested in our fighting the issues about the passport and the United States Department of State and some of the shenanigans there, it's an ongoing saga. You got to see just a little link in the chain of the work that's going on because of necessity for those who are trying to live particularly without a number, and to fulfill their duty before God to those things of society that they necessarily need to honor their neighbor for the sake of protecting life, liberty, and property, while at the same time not casting off their allegiance to the Most High and being true and have integrity in their faith, obedience and sacrifice to the living God, and not compromising, notwithstanding the coercion of the society that's increasingly godless. So the more we stand for God, the more light in the darkness we're going to show, the more influence for right rather than wrong that we're going to have on society. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. Faith, obedience, and sacrifice. So thank you for watching, and God bless you, and look forward to, and oh, by the way, subscribe, share. I intend to improve this, but I also need people to share. I need to actually have the algorithm, whatever these algorithms are, to increase. I think there's actually a donation function there. Because up to this point, I've been slaving like a madman, helping up because I was helping somebody else, and somebody didn't like it. So I just realized it's responsible for me to provide an avenue of support, because those people I help, I don't ask for support from them. Okay, so we're here as a